Thanks for joining us, everyone, this evening. Just to go through what we're going to do, James has got some words to say. Then we'll take a limited amount of questions. We're not going to go around in circles on the questions, so we'll take a limited amount, and then, I can help with anything afterwards. So I'll hand over to James. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I want to repeat what I said on Sunday in Australia. I understand and share the anger and disappointment of Australian fans and the broader Australian community about the events that unfolded in Cape Town on Saturday. We've held a board meeting today, and I want to assure people that the chairman and other directors of Cricket Australia share these same sentiments. So on behalf of Cricket Australia, I want to apologise to all Australians that these events have taken place, and particularly to all the kids who love cricket and idolise the players. I want to also apologise to Cricket South Africa and South African fans that this issue has overshadowed what otherwise should have been a wonderful series. As the chairman has said in his statement earlier tonight, we recognise that this issue goes beyond the technical nature of offences and various codes of conduct. It's about the integrity and reputation of Australian cricket and Australian sport. Ultimately, it's about whether Australians can feel proud of their national sporting teams. That depends as much on the way players conduct themselves as it does about winning or losing. It's all about how we play the game. Earlier today, I received an update about the investigation being conducted by our Head of Integrity, Ian Roy. And in conducting his interviews, Ian was also accompanied by 2 ICC integrity officers. Whilst that investigation is not yet fully complete, preliminary findings have been considered and discussed by the Cricket Australia Board earlier today. The key finding is that prior knowledge of the ball tampering incident was limited to 3 players: Captain Steve Smith, Vice-Captain David Warner and Cameron Bancroft. No other players or support staff had prior knowledge, and this includes Darren Lehman, who, despite inaccurate media reports, has not resigned from his position. He will continue to coach the Australian men's team under his current contract. The players involved have officially been reported for breaching Cricket Australia's Code of Conduct under Article 2.3.5. The substance of the offence can be covered by terms, and I paraphrase somewhat from the article: conduct at any time that is contrary to the spirit of the game, unbecoming of a representative, harmful to the interests of the game, or brings the game into disrepute. Once the investigation has concluded, in the next 24 hours, sanctions will be announced and we'll go through the Cricket Australia Code of Conduct process, and I'll come back to that in a moment. All 3 players who have been reported will leave South Africa tomorrow. Their replacements in the Australian squad for the 4th test here in Johannesburg will be Matthew Renshaw, Glenn Maxwell and Joe Burns. Replacement players will arrive in South Africa over the next 24 hours. Tim Payne has been officially appointed captain of the Australian men's test team. Back to the reporting. In regard to the 3 players on report, I want to stress that we are contemplating significant sanctions in each case. These sanctions will reflect the gravity with which we view what has occurred and the damage it has done to the standing of Australian cricket. I fully understand the appetite for urgency for more detail. However, urgency must be balanced with due process, given the serious implications for all involved. In addition to sanctions for individuals, Cricket Australia will take the opportunity to review the conduct and culture of our professional teams, and naturally this will involve consultation with relevant experts. We'll have more to say about how this will proceed in the coming weeks. A clear focus will be on re-engaging with Australian cricket fans and the Australian public to rebuild respect and pride. I also want to place on record my strong support for the sentiments that ICC CEO David Richardson has expressed about the need to raise standards generally. I agree completely that the ICC and member countries, member boards, including Cricket Australia, need to define more clearly what is expected of players and then enforce the standards in a consistent fashion. And I agree that all member countries, including Cricket Australia, need to show more accountability for their team's conduct. Winning is important, but not at the expense of the laws or the spirit of the game. In conclusion, I understand and share the anger and the disappointment of the Australian cricket family about these events. This is a serious issue and it needs to be dealt with properly and with due diligence. But now, as a matter of urgency, we'll complete the process by tomorrow morning, and in the next 24 hours we'll be in a position to announce sanctions. I'm now happy to take questions.
We'll go with Chris first.
Can Steve Smith take this away again?
I don't want to go into the specifics of sanctions and issues that might be covered there. It's not appropriate at this stage. The big picture is that three players have been reported, and we'll deal with finalising the report and sanctions later.
May I ask, whose idea was it? I mean, that is something that the investigation will be determined by.
Again, there are issues that I can't go into because we're in the midst of process. I suspect some of that will come out in due course, but it's not appropriate because of the technical nature of things, the process that we're working through, for me to divulge details of the investigation.
Has the team become arrogant?
I think this is a reminder to us of the importance of how Australian cricket fans want their players to behave. They want them to be. They want to be proud of their players, and clearly, a situation like this is extraordinarily bad for Australian cricket. And I share, as I said earlier on, the anger and disappointment of Australian cricket fans in regard to this behaviour.
James, can the culture and image of the Australian team be reshaped with Darren as the coach, and have you discussed that with him?
Look, Dan, I haven't gone into any detail. To be honest, I've arrived in South Africa early this morning. Ian Roy hasn't even been in the country for 24 hours and has worked very hard on that. I think first things first, we're trying to deal with reporting issues and then sanctions, and we understand the urgency around that, the need for all of you and others to know where we're up to. That's the real focus right now, and as I said, later on we'll work through a process around that review that I mentioned earlier.
James, there's one word you haven't mentioned. Did they cheat in your eyes? Is this cheating?
This is not in the laws of the game. It is not in the spirit of the game. And again, I am angry and disappointed.
Is it cheating?
It is not a good day for Australian cricket.
James, what's the attitude to the other players in the team who've been dragged into this by those three teammates?
It's difficult for me to say. I haven't spoken to everyone in the team. I've spoken to a limited few, but it's. I can only imagine, but I think it's better that you ask them.
James, do you get the feeling this is an isolated incident, or has it happened previously?
Look, I think the feeling from Ian in his review is that it's an isolated incident, but again, they're things that I don't want to go into too much detail around right now. But I certainly hope it's an isolated incident, but it's certainly one of significant concern.
Hi. There's accusations of a culture of arrogance and even nastiness in terms of the Australian cricket team. Given that, have you considered your own position?
Look, at the end of the day, we want Australian cricket fans to be proud of the Australian cricket team. We're all responsible in that regard, and we will all ensure that we take the necessary steps to address that.
James, how many players were interviewed during the process? I'm not sure off the top of my head, but most of the players were. And officials?
Yes, and again, I don't want to go into the specifics, the detail, because that's not appropriate. That's Ian Roy's domain, and it's better. But I can say that, as I touched on earlier on, Ian has covered a lot of ground in the short space of time that he's been here, and he was through all of the interviews yesterday, accompanied by the 2 integrity officers from the ICC.
Sam?
James, is this like a review like we saw in 2011 the Irish review?
I think, Sam, we haven't had a chance to really consider properly how that will be dealt with. I think by the time we get to our next board meeting, face to face, we'll have that considered and be working through that. But as I touched on earlier on, in the short space of time since Saturday, we've been very focused on trying to get to the bottom of what happened on Saturday to take the necessary action that we deem appropriate, which is obviously, first things first, making reports and sanctions to come.
James, can you explain your reaction, Cricket Australia, to Steve Smith's comments on Saturday that if it was a mistake, the team would get over it, he would get over it, everything would move on? Do you think that was a severe underestimation of the severity of the scandal, and did that disappoint you, make you angry?
Yes.
James, can you just clarify, did Darren Lehman offer to resign?
Darren Lehman has not offered to resign as far as I'm aware. Certainly not to me.
James, what about consideration of the no objection certificates for the IPL, for the players that are leaving, particularly captain?
There are certain grounds in regards to no objection certificates. I'm not sure this qualifies, but if there are significant suspensions that flow from this, that I guess ultimately will then be a matter for the BCCI and the IPL.
Do you find it bitterly ironic that in a certain light Steve Smith showed enormous leadership by fessing up and not just letting his junior player take the blame for that? That's the sort of leader you did have. Do you find that ironic?
Ironic, I'm not sure that's the word I'd use, but there are elements of courage and leadership that have been shown in this, and there are others where other decisions could have been made at other times that have led us to be in the position that we're in.
James, commercially, how much is this likely to hurt Australian cricket? And I'm thinking more around cricket development and women's cricket, which has just started to do really well globally.
I think it's very, very difficult to quantify that, but I wouldn't in any way want to underestimate the damage that it causes to the game. And ultimately, in my view, what we are all about as an organisation is about inspiring kids to love cricket. And if this has damaged the ability of cricket as a sport to inspire kids to play the game and love the game and idolise their heroes, then it's a sorry state, and we need to do everything we can to repair that damage.
James, I noticed you wouldn't use the cheating word, but if it wasn't cheating, what was it? And have these guys apologised to their teammates as well?
I don't know about the second part of your question, but clearly we are not at all comfortable with what has taken place. We have conducted an investigation. We have made reports, and sanctions will be issued tomorrow, and they'll be significant.
James,
and that will reflect the gravity of the situation.
James, sorry to push you on this. It's gone an awful long way, to try and give us clarity on this, and you've conducted, obviously, interviews. Can you not just give us a yes or no answer? Is this cheating?
This is not in the laws of the game. It's not in the spirit of the game.
Rob.
James, have you spoken to Steve today? Just how is his sort of mental state and how shattered is he at the prospect of losing the captaincy?
Look, I think everyone's affected by it. Certainly the three players concerned, I haven't seen all three of them, but I've certainly seen Steve, and he's distraught, very upset.
And do you believe that Warner can come and play again, given the relationship that how it's deteriorated with some of the teammates?
I'm not aware of that, but I'm not sure the relevance of that.
Last four, Jim, Jeff, and then Dan, you're last.
James, how much do you take into account the words of the Prime Minister and his criticism, and how will that impact on your sanctions for these players?
I think, as you know, Jim, from the Prime Minister down, there have been views and opinions expressed, and that's a measure and an indication of the standing of the game of cricket and the Australian cricket team in the eyes of the Australian public, and everyone's entitled to those opinions. On balance, we need to make a judgment that's in the best interest of the game, and that will be based on a whole lot of things. The Prime Minister's comments are only one of hundreds of thousands, millions of Australians' views, and we need to make judgments that are in the best interest of the game.
Down this one, James, you said they've broken the laws of the game, they've broken the spirit of the game. You haven't mentioned the word cheating.
Sorry, James has answered this question. We're going to move on. Jeff?
They've broken the rules.
Jeff?
Is it cheating?
He's answered the question. He's answered it 3 times now. He's answered the question 3 times. We're moving on. Jeff?
He hasn't answered it.
James,
Jeff?
the players involved lied to the umpires in the middle. They came and gave a press conference that was misleading, where they wouldn't admit that David Warner was involved. How can anyone have any confidence that they'll be truthful in the investigation process?
Well, that's up to Ian Roy to make those judgments, and he's experienced in regards to these investigations as to the people that from the ICC that were there, and it's a matter of process that he works through in corroborating evidence and coming to a level of satisfaction about his findings, and that's exactly what he's done.
You were involved in 2003 in drafting a Spirit of Cricket document with the team, and it was also a pillar for some years of the strategy that you have for Australian cricket. Hasn't been on there more recently. Do you think the organisation has gotten away from that?
I regard the Spirit of Cricket as being extremely important, and as we know, those of us that know the game and love the game know that it's beholden on everyone that plays the game to uphold the spirit of cricket. The responsibilities of the captain are higher than anyone, and the leaders as well. But separates it from other sports, and that's part of what hurts right now.
Rob, last question.
James, other international players from other countries have been found guilty of ball tampering in the past and got away with fines from the ICC. What is it about this situation that has prompted such outrage from the Australian public, and why are you contemplating such serious punishment?
Look, I think that it's an issue of great proportion because of the standing of cricket in the eyes of the Australian public, and not only that, the Australian cricket team, and I think that response is not terribly surprising. It's a reminder of how important the game of cricket is to the Australian cricket fans, and it's also a reminder to us as to how important it is to rebuild that confidence, trust and confidence and pride in the Australian cricket team going forward.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks.
To our SuperSport 2 viewers and also SuperSport Blitz, that was James Sutherland, the Chief Executive Officer of Cricket Australia, obviously visibly shaken, I think we could see that. I will let you know also that James wasn't initially going to be coming to South Africa. He was going to handle all the issues in Australia, but such is the gravity of this situation and obviously the moves that have to be made. He has and decided literally 36 hours ago to come over and handle it and have a chat to the players, and it is going to be some 24 hours now, as we just heard from James, before we get the final answer regarding all this. But it is a horrible situation for cricket and for Cricket Australia. There is outrage, as you can imagine, in Australia, and hence the fact that, as James Sutherland said, it sounds like some of these penalties that are going to be handed down to Stephen Smith, also David Warner and Bancroft, are going to be very severe. So we're going to have to wait a little bit longer for the outcome of the investigation. I'm just going to get a couple of views from one or two people. I'll get my first person I'm going to chat to is Peter Lawler, who is the chief writer, for the Australian newspaper in Australia, and has been flat out lots of headlines throughout. Pete, what do you take away from that? What's the one thing that springs to mind straight away?
Well, I suppose the one thing that surprises me is that Darren Lehman has kept his job and has not resigned. There's been a lot of reports that he's resigned. It's no surprise that Stephen Smith, David Warner and Cameron Bancroft are going home. I'm pleased to hear the Chief Executive say that there will be significant sanctions announced against them in the next 24 hours. We were expecting them to be banned for a long time. I can't see these guys playing cricket next summer. I can't see them playing cricket for a year. I suspect David Warner may never play cricket for Australia again, but that may be as a result of his reaction to the sanctions.
Right. So you're saying a year, right? So you're not saying all three? Is that you're talking about the captain and the vice captain and Bancroft?
Well, it's all speculation. I think Bancroft deserves the lesser of the fines. He's a 25-year-old. He's playing his 8th test. He was in, what was the phrase he used? He was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean,
which was an interesting phrase, as it is.
Yeah, sure. Look, and he probably wasn't trying to defend himself. He's a kid in shock, and I just saw him before. He's not coping very well at all. Smith is the captain of the side. The captain's ultimately responsible, as disappointing as it is to all of us, because we all had great respect for Stephen Smith. He's the face on the cornflakes boxes at home, or whatever it is, Weet-Bix. He's really let everybody down. He's let himself down. Warner, well, people probably expected David Warner to be involved in this, because wherever there's a fire, David Warner's standing around with a box of matches, isn't he? It'll be interesting to see how he takes it. He's a great cricketer. He has great spirit, and he's a very, very determined servant of the game. But I think his time's up somehow.
Some attitude issues. I mean, the culture of the team, I think that's, and I agree with you about Darren Lehman. That did surprise us, and we all thought that there was going to be some action, resignation, or whatever with Darren Lehman. But the culture of the team literally has to change so dramatically.
Well, Sutherland did say there that they will conduct a review into the behaviour and the culture of the team. That has to happen, doesn't it? Because part of this anger, this blowback from the Australian fans and from cricket around the world, is that they're not very happy about the way the Australian cricket team has been playing. Yep. You know, I think they've used this as an excuse to say, look, there's a lot of things we are uncomfortable about. The team's been told this time and again and responded, well, that's the way we play your best cricket. Well, the fans have said, well, no, not anymore. You know, it doesn't matter. We want to see you play cricket in the best possible spirit. That seems to be the feedback from Australians. And the feedback from around the world just shows you how upset other nations are by the way Australia conduct themselves on the field. Yeah, there's a lot of glee in other cricket nations about this. I think finally Australia have got their just desserts.
What about I mean, it's just crazy that, for example, the ICC didn't even ban Bancroft, and there was only the one match with Steve Smith. I mean, that's got to be so wrong that Cricket Australia have come here now, and obviously you're going to put these heavy penalties down, yet the ICC basically are fine. I mean, that doesn't hurt the players at all. No,
well, and Faf du Plessis wasn't banned, and he's done it twice, hasn't he? So the ICC does not...
Very different situation.
Yeah. The ICC, I'll let that one go, Mike. The ICC does not take ball tampering seriously. It needs to readdress it. you can't be half pregnant. You know, what, it's okay to use a foreign object to shine the ball, but it's not okay to use a foreign object to damage the ball. These are fine, the technical lines, aren't they?
Totally artificial introduction of an artificial product to. But anyway, we'll continue. You've got your finger on the pulse of your readers. I mean, just give our viewers on SuperSport a feel of what the Australian public is feeling.
If you open the windows in this room right now, you would feel the hot breath of rage from Australians. They are so angry, so disappointed, so let down. They have so much pride in this cricket team. It's the number one team in the country. It's the number one sport. You know, that's what the Australian kids grew up aspiring to be, as members of the Australian cricket team. You know, you can put up with a bit of rubbish from a footy team. There's a lot of footy teams, but the cricket team holds a sacred place in the Australian pantheon. And, gee, it's now looking about as grubby as the churches, mate.
You got a lot of work to do now.
I sure do.
Busy night ahead.
Yeah, thanks for holding me up.
Right, thank you. Back, you get to work. Let me see. Thanks, Peter. Appreciate your time. Who else can I have a chat to? Jim Maxwell. Jim, come and have a chat to me. Jim has been with the ABC radio, is the voice of radio, voice of cricket on the radio in Australia, been with the ABC for some 45 years. Righto, Jim, what are your thoughts about what James said?
I feel slightly cheated with his answers, to be honest. I think he could have been stronger. I know the press gallery here were trying to draw him into using that word, and I think for most Australians that's the word they would be using, because what else can you describe that kind of act, blatant, brazen as it was, other than cheating? So that did surprise me. I don't know why he was underplaying it in such a way. They're going to pass pretty serious judgment on these players for what has occurred. I mean, I don't know, 6, 12-month bans, whatever it might be.
What do you think, Jim? What do you reckon the bans are going to be for the captain and the vice captain, the former captain and the former vice captain?
Well, in terms of justice, from what I've heard of this, David Warner should get the biggest penalty. But the problem with that is that just the convention, I suppose. Steve Smith's the captain. He's the man in charge. He's got to face the music. So that is unlikely. So if they're both going to, say, they have to be the same. Warner couldn't be less than Smith, I would have thought. I don't know, 6 to 12 months. I think they've probably been a bit light on this in the past. And now's the time. Yeah, now's the time to do something about it. But it seems to me, if there's a clearing of the decks going on here, they haven't quite done the job, if I can put it that way. So I don't know what's going to happen beyond this, other than Australia goes through a very torrid period of struggling to win test matches. Mind you, they don't play any more tests until India come to Australia. By then, these players may have served their time. I'm not sure whether Warner's going to be all that welcome, though, following what we've heard in the last day or two about the division in the camp, and he's been pretty much ostracised. So I think that he might have his name ruled through for Test cricket anyway, but probably the whole lot.
Do you think the way that this has been now handled by Cricket Australia, and I would stress if you're joining us now on SuperSport, we've got to wait another 24 hours before we do get the final bans from James Sutherland. Do you think this has really sent a huge notice to the ICC?
Oh, I'm not so sure.
The fact that they didn't really act, but Cricket Australia have had their own investigation and are going to be very heavy on it.
Look, I would imagine the ICC will say they acted in terms of the law as they've got it in front of them. They did what they had to do. But there'll be plenty of people who say this type of behaviour, which was so deliberate, it wasn't impulsive or instinctive. I think it required a heavier censure, yes.
We're surprised that we all talked about it. We all expected some movement from Darren Lehmann. Were you surprised that didn't happen?
I'm still struggling to believe, going on your television footage at the time and his reaction and Bancroft slipping the offending item into his DAX, that he didn't know something about what was going on. That's what surprises me. But maybe that'll come out in the wash in the next day or two. But yeah, that did surprise me. And the other thing that surprised me, it was on the same flight as the players today. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I saw as I walked onto the plane was Darren Lehmann sitting in business class. And then all the rest of the blokes were down the back. Mm-hmm. So I thought, something's going on. Okay.
tell our viewers what you're hearing from your listeners back in Australia? I mean, what is their feeling about this whole situation?
I think there's a mixed feeling. There's a feeling that the Warner's the major culprit in all this, and that Smith's too soft, and he shouldn't have been so naive as to allow it to occur. My understanding is that they were in the dressing room in the lunch break, and Bancroft and Warner were concocting something, and Smith said, "What are you doing?" "I don't want to know about it." And then he went out onto the field, and your cameras picked up the rest, unfortunately. So I think Smith's going to be, well, not so much a scapegoat, but he's going to be harshly done by for what he's done, which was basically dumb, naive, all of those things. And I suppose that deserves a penalty on its own. But to me, Warner is the worst offender.
I asked James if it is an isolated incident, obviously looking into that as well. I'm not convinced it was. What's your gut feeling on that?
I'm not convinced it was, but listening to Stuart Broad talk the other day, I don't think even England came up with concrete evidence of this kind of thing occurring on the field. And let's face it, we know about sweets and various other substances being used to improve the condition of the ball, or something else being used to worsen it so they can replace it, I guess. But well, we keep going on about it, but this was just so blatant that it's hard to forgive.
I want to go just on your 45 years in the radio. I mean, where does this rate in respect to your career as to the worst things you've seen on a cricket field?
Well, there have been some bad things, I suppose, here and there over the years, but in terms of an abuse of the spirit of the game, this would have to be right up there. People go on about the underarm incident, but that was just an aberration, and it wasn't even unlawful. And I still remember being at the SCG the next game, and Greg Chappell came out to field, and the crowd cheered. So that's how quickly the Aussies forgave him in that instance. But I'm not sure whether that's going to happen here. And probably the best thing that can happen for certainly Smith is to be out of the limelight, be away from the game, which he's more than likely to be for the wrong reasons. But yeah, there's been a few other things that have happened in the game. But World Series cricket in its own way was quite a disturbance for all of us. And that had a pretty good outcome. So I'm hoping that this will have a good outcome, because I'd written to James Sutherland a few weeks ago expressing my disappointment following that rancorous in Durban and the skirmish in the stairwell. Yep. And I said the behaviour in Australia is getting out of control, and it has been for some time. And I did say that I feel that Darren Lehmann's part of this, because he has a narrow view of the way the game should be played. All this nonsense about pushing the line, right? Well, it's gone too far. And the way the players were behaving there gave you an indication that they may have lost the plot. And an error of judgment was around the corner. And unfortunately, with Warner caught up with a spectator abusing him, all the stuff that's been going on around de Kock and his wife and those family insults, something stirring in his brain. They're trying to catch up with the game. They're getting desperate. What are we going to do? Well, let's try and rough up the ball a bit more, do something with it. So, unfortunately, I think Warner's had too much influence and he needed to be curbed. And it's quite surprising to a lot of people that has happened, because just recently he was the Australian T20 captain, and all of a sudden he had Boy Scout badges all over him for his performance, but no more. And I'd be very surprised if he plays for Australia again.
And final question, surely Steve Smith won't captain ever again? You think he'll play again but won't captain ever again?
I would say it's most unlikely. This is the other thing I need to say about Steve Smith. He was on the plane today, and I was just trying to say something, and it can be very clumsy, very awkward when you're in that position, sliding down the aisle. And I just wanted to reassure him that there is a tomorrow, right? This will go away, and you'll be able to get on with your life. And I know that's damn hard at the moment to think like that. but I do have some sympathy for the situation he's found himself in, because he was sort of trying to do the right thing at that presser the other night. He didn't mention Warner's name. He could have dropped him right in it. I probably should have. And the fact that he didn't realise the consequences of the action that those fellas took was quite galling, really, that he didn't see it at the time. And I think that's been one of the problems in the team. They just do not see where they sit in the game. And Australians just will not tolerate anyone who breaches the code, as it were. They don't mind the odd larrikin, someone having a bit of fun, a fellow like Shane Warne, but, you know, breaking the code of the game, the spirit of spirit, is not on.
Yep. Jim, thanks very much for your views.
Righto, mate.
Good stuff. Righto, Jim Maxwell, 45 years, as I said, with radio. I'm just going to see if I can get Dan from Crick Info, if he can just come and have a quick word. I know Dan Brettig is very busy. He's the assistant editor of ESPN Crick Info. Dan, what are your thoughts? Just brief, I know you're about to punch out a story there. What were your thoughts from James Sutherland?
I think he's in the middle of a process, and to a degree there was an element of hiding behind that process in what he had to say. Made it clear, obviously, that 3 players were going home, but they're still to be facing a hearing and finding out what their punishments are. So a little bit like he spoke in Melbourne a few days ago, that he's still very much in the middle of this and unable to give a definitive answer on things.
Why didn't he go the cheating route? I mean, I think we all in this room know it was pretty blatant cheating. Why do you think that was such a hard thing for him to say?
The first thing that came to my mind was that the players are still to have those hearings, and they're effectively charged with cheating under the Cricket Australia Code of Behaviour. They could then, given that they can have their own legal representation in that hearing, then say that we've been prejudiced by the CEO of Cricket Australia saying that we're cheats. I believe that would be one of the considerations.
And Darren Lehman?
Darren Lehman, it's a big question whether he can stay on as coach to change a culture that he was the architect of, really, when he came on board in 2013. And that's one of the real unanswered questions from this. James Sutherland indicating that there will be a review of the Australian team's culture, but that won't be right now, leaving Darren Lehman in charge for the moment and, I guess, in a bit of limbo.
Now, what about the team coming up? Obviously, we've got a test match. We've got to remember a test match coming. I mean, the team is going to be very different with personnel. How different do you think they will be on the park? I mean, we've heard them on the park the last couple of test matches, particularly in Durban, and the stump mics. It was very poor. That's how I can assess it. How different will they be now on the park of the Wanderers?
The most telling thing that I've heard from an Australian cricketer since the whole ball tampering episode was Tim Payne speaking after the match at Newlands. It was the first time I'd heard an Australian cricketer speak publicly about the image of the team and the need of the team to change its image. That's not something that's been part of the rhetoric over the past 5 years with Darren Lehman as the coach. So that's a significant change. I think that tells you that it's going to be a very different Australian team and a very different approach at the Wanderers.
I know you've got to go and write. A couple more questions. What do you think of that presser when they fronted Bancroft and also Smith? I mean, do you think that was properly planned?
I think they were following the customs that they'd followed as an Australian team for a while, both in terms of accepting the ICC's charge of ball tampering. They're not a team that's known for challenging verdicts from the ICC and their match referees. And also, once that charge has been put through, the players concerned generally front the media straight away. I think they thought that if they followed that process, which was their usual process, they'd be okay. They miscalculated.
They had no idea it was going to be this big.
No, and I don't think anyone did, really. It was a combination of what had happened already in the Test series. It was a combination, as James Sutherland said, of the esteem in which the game is held in Australia, and it was also just the blatant nature of it and the blatant nature of the admission that this had been done. I think all of those factors came together to make it the perfect storm we see.
I think you've just given your story. Righto, get back there and write your story. Thanks. I appreciate your time, Dan. Thank you. Righto, so there's a view of 3 very important people that are working flat out now, and of course this whole room right now is busy with journalists getting their stories back to Australia, some local journalists here as well. And of course we've got more to tell you. In 24 hours there'll be another announcement to let you know exactly what is happening with the bans. And as everyone is expecting in this room, and the 3 guys I just spoke to, everyone expects these bans are going to be lengthy, and some talk of around about the 12-month region is what is being considered by the journalists around the place who are generally in the know. Righto, that's it from here at the moment. Back to SuperSport.